Well, welcome, my friends. I've got a wonderful man with me, Martin Shaw. We're here in Cleveland. I'm giving a talk tonight, and I invited Martin to have some time together. So I thought it's too good an opportunity, Martin, to not talk about something.
Thank you, Aidan. This is a delight. It is one of the first really spring-like days we've had. I'm really very happy to be in your company. What should we talk about?
I was thinking about this today, and I think one of your visions for life is to help people to see the wonder of life with Christ. Now we read the Bible and we hear the same parables, but we just get so used to them. I think one of your gifts is to waken us up. And your language is so rich. You sort of shock us. That's what I love about G.K. Chesterton. He's not childish, but he's childlike. He tries to awaken us.
Yeah.
And so we've seen it for the first time. And I figured that the style of icons often surprises us in the same way. So I thought we could talk a bit about that, about how one could help the other. Someone, I think it was Lewis once, who said that Tolkien said that Christianity is a true myth.
Yes.
So perhaps.
Yes, for sure.
Okay. So could you tell me your vision for how you think we as Christians, but also how we reflect life with Christ to non-Christians needs to be re-energized?
For the last 10 years of my life of doing some versions of what I do now for about 30 years, people have always been asking me for a new story. Mm-hmm. What's the new story? We need a new story for now. And I've often felt that probably there was a story that we need now that turned up exactly on time several thousand years ago. Mm-hmm. Now, having been immersed now into Orthodoxy and Christianity, I can name that story. Mm-hmm. And it's really a question of retelling something of such profundity. It doesn't need to be radically changed, but it does need to be re-experienced. It needs to be rehydrated. It needs to be reawakened. So I think about a painter like Cézanne, and Cézanne would paint the same blue-grey mountain over and over again, because actually most of us in our lives are not meant to work with an endless diversity of stories or images. There's normally maybe half a dozen that completely claim our attention, and we endlessly circle and deepen into them. So I am trying to rehydrate through my art form a story that we think we already know, a story that is so combed over, our ears have actually gone poetically dead to it. We've just come through Easter. How could it be that you can grow up and even something like the Passion feels passionless?
Yeah.
That's dreadful. And that's one of the things that interests me in your work as an iconographer. It's so painterly what you're doing. There's so much movement, and I have a long-standing engagement and love of painting. When you started out, what was bringing you to iconography? Were you a sculptor beforehand?
That's right, I was a sculptor, and mainly heads I was interested in because I like to go into one thing in depth, and doing the whole figures was important, but to me the face was everything. I didn't know Greek then, so I didn't know that face and person meant the same thing. So I felt that I wanted to express something of this union of flesh and spirit, inside and outside. And I realized, looking at other religious art, African, Egyptian, they do things like elongate, abstract a bit, shock you a little bit as a person, but not a person you see on the street. So when I discovered the icon, I realized that this tradition had been doing what I've been trying to do in my little life, but living it for 2 years. Interestingly, independently of the icon, I come to some conclusions stylistically of what gives a spiritual potency to faces. And then I discovered it was in the icon. So in a sense, I reinvented the wheel. That was great. Like slightly enlarged eyes, if not elongated nose, but a strong vertical.
Yeah.
Things like that. And I'll show you some photographs later. Wow, some of the sculptures I did toward the end. So that made me appreciate the wisdom of tradition. We tend to think of tradition as stultifying, but I realized actually I was tapping into incredible wisdom here, not just the people mindlessly copying, but I realised because we can date an icon and tell what, not just what country, but what part of the country it came from, there's tremendous diversity in the icon tradition. But at the same time, there was this sort of accumulated wisdom. So it'd be foolish of me not to tap into that. And then add my thing, as it were, do my own thing, but still standing on the shoulders of what came before.
So we've just come out of Easter, our Easter anyway, which is a little later, and I spent an enormous amount of time kissing icons. I have been caught in this liturgical whirlwind of the divine liturgy and the Pascha services all around it. Do you think, for me, part of what you're doing is it opens up, you know, an imagistic experience of divine ground, as well as a you know, I was going to say literary is not quite the right word, but images as well as words, that we have a very emboldened passion tradition that pulls us in through images when actually our eyes are tired and we don't want to read anymore.
Well, you mentioned earlier, Martin, that we tend to have 4 or 5 stories. For me, one of those 5 stories is the burning bush, the bush that burned without being consumed. I'm just obsessed with that. So there, and I've done 1 or 2 essays on this. It's image and word perfectly. So he's going about his daily business, and he sees this weird sight, a bush burned without being consumed. So it says, I'll go and see what the strange sight is. So that's like an icon, which is a strange thing. And then God speaks to Moses by name, Moses, and then a dialogue happens, and then Moses is called to do something. So image first, to wake them up, and then conversation through word, and then action.
I see. Okay.
And it's holy, you're talking about place as well. You've got to think it's holy place. It's got to take your shoes off, and there's this profoundly life-changing experience. And God acts in a way that is beyond his natural capacities. He said, I'm a bumbling idiot, I can't speak properly, and so God uses an arrow and so on. But and of course the bush is an image of the Mother of God, it's an image of transfiguration, everything. So that sort of correlates to what you're saying.
So that would be the burning bush would be one of your great images. Now, in the decades, I presume now, of doing this, right now, where do you find yourself? What's most alive for you? What you're working on?
We had a very interesting commission for an Orthodox marine biologist, a professor in California, Point Loma University, who commissioned, when I say an icon, it's not an icon in the sense that it will probably be used liturgically, but stylistically, it's an icon. And the mandate was, it sort of grew with time, but initially it was somehow to combine evolution, not obviously the goddess evolution, but the sense of gradual progression and creation, with end times. So I've designed this icon, the design's only that big, but the final icon will be almost 2 meters high. So basically it's an alpha omega icon, the beginning and the end. So I start with the days of creation, but it moves up toward paradise, which is in the middle, and above we have the New Jerusalem. And I studied maths and biology at university, but did a major in English. So I always felt passionate about the material world as God's expression of love. And I'm a bit upset how science and faith have sort of gone their own separate ways. I want to reintroduce the poetry of creation. That creation is a burning bush. So this icon is an exciting opportunity for me to express all sorts of things, but the divine idea of time, kairos, as distinct from chronos, matter and spirit, the progress from mere wild forest toward garden, toward New Jerusalem, there's so many things. And because it's a new commission, which is not going to use liturgic, I'm a bit freer. But the feedback I've had from theologians has been really good. So I think it's actually going to be quite an interesting point of discussion. Before it goes to America, we'll have it in England for about 6 months, so I can varnish it after 6 months. So we probably have some in Bath. I hope it'll be ready for the Orthodox Art Festival. So hopefully there'll be some sort of conferences, but meetings.
What is the Orthodox Art Festival?
It's been going a few years in Bath. It's a parish in Bath which I was a member of for some years. and Tamara Penwell was Orthodox iconographer there. I think she might have initiated it, but basically it's an art festival which isn't just icons. There are a lot of painters in the parish, other people invited in, there's some brilliant musicians in the parish who do what I call threshold art. It's not liturgical, but it's sort of stuff that expresses something of the faith. So it goes just for a weekend, I think. I forget the date, it's October.
Right.
So yeah, it's growing each year. Well, every 2 years I think they do, but it grows.
And how long does a piece you're working on typically take?
The design stage, I suppose, took me 2 weeks. The making, probably about a month.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And
I know icons I can do in 4 hours.
Okay.
I just did something.
I remember the 4-hour version.
Well, this is the reason for King Charles with his cancer. So I just whipped up quickly an icon of St. Luke of Symphoropol, the sainted surgeon. So I thought that was appropriate.
Oh, good.
And often the quicker ones are better. Have you found that with your poetry sometimes?
I have. It's a funny thing I've noticed in my own life. I often prefer sketches to finished paintings. Something in the final layer, well, it's revealing more, but there's a liveliness about the sketch. You know, a Rembrandt Browning sketch is worth a lot more to me than you know, many other finished so-called masterpieces, I suppose. So
you can see the process, can't you? It's got history, a story.
You can see in a way, I suppose, I can see the artist thinking in the sketch. I can see the movement and the vulnerability, and that. Yeah, that's interesting. I find as a painter, there'll come a point where the canvas simply can't take any more paint. And there's so much history behind the marks you're now making. There's so much scarification of the canvas, even though you're scraping it back. By now the canvas is starting to sag. You're spraying water on the back to get it to try and tighten again.
Could you tell us a bit about your own relationship between painting and words? How one feeds off the other?
Well, I lived in a tent for 4 years. I think that I was looking for an orthodoxy I didn't exist. I'm sort of, even though I speak and write for a living, I would have a bit of the old hesychasm flying about in me behind the scenes. And so I was looking in my late 20s to leave everything I thought I knew. So I lived in a tent for 4 years, but I painted while I was in that tent. And I realised that the movements of a hand with a paintbrush, you can make small intricate moves, or you can make wider, longer strokes, and they create a different type of painting. They look different, they have a different energy. And I used to think to myself, if I ever write, I'd like to write in some way that reflects the kind of painting that I'm interested in. And I don't know quite how that worked itself out, but I'm now 18 books in. I've written 18 books, just finishing one for Penguin at the moment about the notion that Christianity has forgotten that it's a dream.
I'm dying to hear you talk about that.
Well, for me, Orthodoxy didn't forget. It didn't forget that it was a dream. And when I say dream, I don't mean something insubstantial. I mean dream in the sense, the biblical sense of one of the ways in which God speaks directly to us, wakes us up, tells us we have to change our life. So when I started to write, and I look back, I don't know what it's like with your work. Some of my early work, I'm kind of gritting my teeth as I look at it, even though other people will say, well, you were never better. You were never better than the first book. But I was somehow trying to get into the zone that I get into in painting. There's nothing I do so transformative as the experience of painting. I don't know what it's like in your studio. I will look at the clock and 2.5, 3 hours have passed like that. Whereas everything else, including writing, you are aware of the labour.
Yeah, I mean, some people say, isn't painting an icon a wonderful experience? To me, it's hard work, and often the ones that, I say, get the most hits when I put it on Facebook are the ones I really laboured over. I just finished about a month ago an oak relief target that big of the 3 children in the fiery furnace. For various reasons, that was really hard, but that's the one that most people love. So if someone says to me, "Oh, I just love the experience of painting icons," without a lot of students, I'm suspicious.
Right.
I'm suspicious. Because there's always an aesthetic. And you probably noticed in icon faces, there's joy, hopefully, but also a bit of sadness, there's a sort of concentration.
Yes.
And I think that unity is probably needed. I suppose writing a book, there are different phases, some are spring, some are winter, some are hard work, but you've got all those feelings in the same writing.
I knew a psychologist called James Hillman towards the end of his life, and Hillman always said to me, footnotes are how you praise your ancestors.
Okay.
And that was very good for young writers who didn't want to be encumbered by tradition, wanted to cover the tracks of their influences, didn't want to admit the legacy that they owe. But Hillman said, no, that's how we learn to trust you, is by your footnotes. And I like that, and I like it when I see it in paintings. Now here's the question. Would I be wrong or right in thinking that icons of Christ, he's almost always looking directly at you? Do you get profiles?
No, you never get a profile.
No.
Generally, only get a profile if the person's either just a dead sinner, or a really bad person, or they're sort of not even second tertiary in the event, but very rarely.
Right.
Because if everyone's in a relationship, if you're not in a relationship, you're dead.
Yeah.
That's why in the Old Testament, one of the prayers was, "Lord, do not turn your face away from me."
Yes,
if God turned his face away from you, you wouldn't only die, you would cease to exist.
Yeah.
So, so all the saints really are looking at a 3/4. At least you're looking at a person, but you're still not close to the other. But interestingly, the counterbalance to that is you really get a perfectly symmetrical face, which is a bit aggressive.
Yeah.
I was talking to a Greek the other day about the evil eye. They were saying that if someone really stares at you, that's not inviting a relationship, that's quite aggressive. So an icon is always slightly turned, the eyes might be turned towards you, but it's sort of leaving a space.
Okay.
I was 2 years in the Vera Monastery, Mount Athos, and the abbot there was just a wonderful man, Saint Father Basilius. And he had a way about him where he would create this fragrant space, is the best way I can describe it. It was as though he's describing something that's beautiful, not in a sentimental way, and you're attracted into that space. Some people are going at you, they're sort of throwing truth at you, and walk away.
Yeah.
But the saints sort of have this attractiveness, but there's a space, and you can walk into it or you can walk away. Fine, either way.
You've been, I think, for over 30 years now, more,
40 years Orthodox.
Yeah, 40 years Orthodox.
And most of that, iconographer.
Yeah. It feels, and I'm rather late to the party in that sense, but it feels as if there's the churches are filling rapidly, there's young people involved. What is happening?
Yeah, the last 3 years, it's been amazing. I think people like yourself who, John Froigeau and others, who are rooted in the church, but also understand the world, they understand how people think, understand what people are looking for, and they're wary of using packed religious language.
Yeah.
So podcasts, I just think podcasts are brilliant because they're long enough, for an hour, to real depth. So some people are very wary of any sort of social media, but podcasts have depth. And also these people I know, young people in our parish, our parish has grown about 40% in the last 2 or 3 years. Most of them are young men and women. And for a lot of them, well, for all of them, it's been some form of beauty. Some of them, it's the icons that first attracted them. Some it's been podcasts, some it's been music. But certainly podcasts have been an important part of filling out, as well as the liturgy, which is the primary input. Podcasts have been a way of them dealing with their intellectual questions. So I think a number of things have come together, but I always found that because people are made in God's image,
Yeah.
it doesn't matter what they say they are in their head, atheist, it doesn't matter. They're made in God's image. When they discover the community living not in God's image only, but God's likeness, and people like that about how the Father's distinguished with the image and likeness. It's strange, but it's a homecoming.
Yeah.
So I think we're getting more and more of these parishes with more individuals.
Yeah.
And they think, wow, that's what we're looking for. I mean, did you find it was a homecoming in a way to come to Orthodoxy? Strange, but a homecoming or not?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah.
I did. It's the first time I've ever entered a church and not wanted to leave.
Yeah.
you know, I mean, I've been to beautiful churches before, but I just wanted to stay. And also at the end of Divine Liturgy, often, you know, the coffee comes out and people hang around. I, even now as a veteran of the liturgy, I'm not normally in a state where I'm massively chatty. By the time we've got through that, I need quiet. Something has happened, some great tectonic shift inside my own soul. So it's a wonderful homecoming.
It's a homecoming, but it's quite dangerous.
Well,
in a sense. I mean,
that's it.
It changes your life.
It does change your
It
life.
wrecks your life.
You know, because what happens is the more seriously you take it.
The sound quality might be better for a bit closer.
Yeah. The more seriously you take it, there's no quadrant of your being that Christ doesn't get access to. Yeah. An image I've used a lot before in my own woeful case is when he goes into the temple and throws the moneylenders out. I feel still in the midst of that experience, and he's now getting down into the dungeon and the second attic that I've never told anybody about, and he's having a look in there too. And Christ will talk to anybody, which is wonderful, but then the ask from that conversation is so catastrophically wonderful that everything can't help but really fall apart around you.
Yeah.
So that's my experience of it. Orthodoxy is my daily defeat by beauty.
Yeah, that's a lovely phrase. Yeah. I love your phrase as well.
Have my moments.
Yeah. For me, I've been my worst enemy in the sense that as an idealist, sometimes I do things and it can completely change my life, do things because I think that's the ideal.
Yeah.
But it's not right for me. Yeah. And that's been my danger. My idealism has been my danger. Right. And the biggest turnings in my life have been where I've been true to myself. Yeah. Not in this sort of silly, modern, egotistical way, but like when I first became a conscious believer, I had a sort of tentative Christian upbringing. I remember lying in bed one day, and I was a teacher at the time. I did my degree in my diploma and was teaching as a secondary school teacher, which I really hated. I thought, well, let's just dream a bit. What you really have to do, forgetting all financial difficulties. Yeah. Immediately, I become a sculptor, become an artist. I thought, well, actually, let's just sort of, in my imagination, reconstruct my life. Yeah. And so I ended up leaving teaching, going sculpting. But before that point, especially as a Baptist, God was my employer and my job was to save souls, and that was still functional, and I did it really well, and I really worked hard. But at that point, when I decided to become a sculptor, God was very different for me then. He was a lover, he was someone who just wanted me he considered me a unique person, like everyone is unique. And my relationship completely changed. And then things that I've been trying to do in my own effort just happened naturally because I was loving God as aid in heart, not as some sort of artificial construct. And of course that changed my life, but it sort of, the change was from within. So God was no longer a thing beyond, but he was like the ground of my being. So to know him, I had to know myself in an honest way.
Yes, C.S. Lewis would call, in the Pilgrim's Regress, he would call God the landlord, which is a very, I understand it, but actually my own encounter with Christ was not really with a landlord. It was with something nearer to me than my own breath. Exactly. And that was frightening, actually. It was frightening because suddenly what I've experienced, one of the great secret gifts of Orthodoxy, I never expected it is evaporated any profound loneliness I may have had. And I think I probably have, the very air around me is angelic. Occasionally there's devilment, but a lot of the time there are invisible forces wishing me well. And so actually I very rarely feel utterly on my own. I've lived for a long time with a sense of what they talk biblically, the Elohims, the spirits of the air, but the sense of profound good being present, pushing your ideas along, nurturing you, calling you to account, Those things for me are, that's wonderful. It's changed the environment that I live in, absolutely.
Do you find it changes, so I use this image, changes people from being a bush to them being a bush burning without being consumed? In other words, you see people in a different way.
Yes. I think the without being consumed bit is important, because when you read, the early patristic fathers, there are these kind of become fire protestations, which are very exciting, but they also lead literally to burnout. Whereas there is a light that never goes out. There is this inexhaustible flame, and it is reasoned and deep and calm in the same way that it is absolutely illumined.
Sober fire.
Yeah, the sober fire, isn't it? It's very hard for us to talk about these things. It's a bit like pointing at this amazing thing, and if you haven't tasted, if you didn't know how good Guinness actually tasted, I could describe it, but you'd really want to say have a sip. So it's a little bit like that. How did you? I have to ask this. Just the experience of being so connected to the King's coronation last year. I sadly was out of the country, but people contacted me and said, "There's this iconography around." Did you have much build-up time to this happening? Did you know it was going to happen?
Just night before last, I gave a talk at Temenos Academy on the screen. Because of course, well, you gave a talk and give me another one, haven't you? I've been talking with to Daniel about it. I was excited.
Good guy, really good. Yeah, had a good conversation before. Yeah, so literally on the year anniversary to the day, I gave that talk about the screen. I'll give you the text on it. Thank you. Thank you.
I didn't have much time, so I got a phone call from Sir Clive Alderton, the primary chief private secretary for the King. I've done a lot of work for the King, and he wanted it to be iconographic. So that made me think about what is iconographic in that context, and this was margin my talk really, that there were layers of meaning to it. So the initial one was that it was the Commonwealth tree, but really many other layers behind it. But so that was, what was it, end of October, end of November, I forget which. And we had to have it done by April, so there wasn't much time at all. So I did the main design within 2 days, and then it was just a matter of fine-tuning. We had other ideas to have the 4 evangelists on the side, because the King wanted the content, not the design, but the content to be based on a window made for the Queen's Golden Jubilee at St James's Palace, for the Chapel Royal. So that had the Commonwealth tree with the names of the Commonwealth members. It had the scroll with the words of Julian and Norwich, all should be well, all manner of things should be well, the King's cipher and a few other things. So because there were 4 evangelists being in the window, I had 4 evangelists on the side, but they had to be dropped because of lack of time. And also inside, I designed the anointing of King Solomon by Zadok the priest and Nathan, but we had to leave those out. So there are lots of sort of computations, but it's a real joy to do it. And I believe in iconography being related to place, and the coronation was going to occur on this marvellous cosmati floor. So the Crosser design sort of was inspired by that. So it was a combination of sort of that 40-year tradition of iconography I've been involved in, the fact that it's a ritual piece, it's going to be used physically, it's a way to design it the right size. I worked closely with Nicholas, who was the project manager. He did all the woodwork. I just love the fact that it was made by community. Yeah. So about 150 people involved in making it.
Wow.
It was made by the Royal College of Needlework at Hampton Court. But people who'd studied here were living in Australia, so some people made bits in Australia. So it was quite international, but a community. And I just love. I've got no sort of ego about that sort of thing. I just love working in community. So,
good man. My favourite communities, half the community lives in the imagination. So you get long dead poets live in my community. Caravaggio lives in my community. Mirabai, an Indian poet, lives in my community. So long live communities of the imagination.
I think one of the
We've probably got a minute or two left.
One thing I wanted to talk about, we can finish perhaps with that, is the nature of tradition. It's got a bad press recently, but you're talking about all these people in your mind, you're creating new, fresh things, but yet they're old.
Yeah.
And you're speaking out of community,
Yeah.
living and dead, but by living
Yeah.
in the magic. Could you talk a bit about your understanding of tradition then?
Some of my roots would be Irish,
Okay.
and an Irish way of describing what I do is something called a shanachie. And a shanachie would be a cultural historian of a place. They would have one foot in the other world, one foot in history, maybe a third foot somehow in the present moment. But they're understood as what you would call thin or liminal people. And I think a lot of the saints, have some of that in common with them. So tradition, I think to build a culture, you need tradition in one hand and innovation in the other, and you need to live in the tension of both. I've been thinking recently that Christ invites us to be both steadfast and restless at the same time. And the steadfastness is clear in the Gospels, but there's no doubt about it. If you read, say, the Gospel of Mark, there's an urgency and a restlessness to what Yeshua is up to. And so I think as soon as you choose, which I think modernity has tried to do, as soon as you fetishize the restless, brilliant artist who is essentially rootless, you've lost all the tension, all the glorious artistic tension. You've lost the counterweight between the two. So for me, tradition at its best tradition, ironically, even when it seems absolutely like a rock, is still somehow in movement. Again, I think this is a Christian idea that you build your house on the rock, but on the other hand, in a way, the more steadfast, the more rooted in tradition you are, oddly, you can be more sure in your risk taking. So when an innovation arrives, it may be rather exceptional. A poet that I like, Gary Snyder, who is he's still alive, I think he was 94 yesterday. Snyder would say when he was apprenticing as a Zen monk in Japan, originality was an accident. They really enjoyed it when it happened, and everyone would kind of take the day off. But it wasn't a thing you fetishized. No, you were looking for practice. You were looking to be deeply rooted. And then practice, solidity that leads to wonder, reverie leads to participation in the things of the world.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I think that's why I'm attracted to a lot of the early modern painters and sculptors like Brancusi, Kandinsky to some extent and others, because they were actually still, in a sense, related to the classical tradition, certainly Brancusi one, but at the same time they're doing new things, and that's what they tend. Later on, I think Pollock, you mentioned him earlier, and Rothko, they're still in that classical tradition, but still stretching it. But,
They are.
But if he's not, without that background, then it's all flabby.
Yeah.
Basically.
With Kandinsky, we were talking earlier about painters that influenced my writing. If you look at if any of you now have a Kandinsky painting in your mind, you'll see this movement across the page. That is, it's Kandinsky, and in a way his great disciple Cy Twombly that I come back to again and again. It's this movement, and it's connected to calligraphy, and it's connected to the ancient world. It's tremendously stirring, very sophisticated, and for me has what I would call pinpricks of eternity in it.
Lovely. Martin, it's been wonderful.
What
We
a
could
joy.
go forever.
We could go literally forever. All right. Thank you, my friend.